For 30 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to welcome my colleague, Congressman Joe Crowley, the chair of the Democratic Caucus, who's joining us this evening as well. I know how very busy he is, and we appreciate it. I also want to submit for the record the remarks of Congressman Brendan Boyle, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in support of our efforts here this evening. As author of the legislation that created our nation's World War II memorial here in Washington, I felt obligated and actually compelled to come to this well tonight. I wish to place on the record the Trump administration's hollow January 27th statement commemorating International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and I ask unanimous consent to do that.
Without objection, the materials will be entered into the record.
Astoundingly, the White House statement made no reference to the 6 million Jews that perished in the Holocaust. There was no mention of anti-Semitism, nor a reference to Israel, as has been customary in prior statements issued by our past presidents. And I will be submitting for the record a statement by President George Bush in 2008, and also submitting to the record a statement by President Barack Obama from 2015 showing what those White Houses said about Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Without objection, the materials will be entered into the record.
So let me be clear. Between 1933 and 1945, 14 million unarmed men, women, and children were murdered in Eastern Europe. These bloodlands were where most of Europe's Jews lived, and where Hitler and Stalin's imperial plans overlapped. Of the 14 million human beings who were killed, at least 6 million were Jews. Jewish souls. Their carnage was the largest in human history. Thus, the brevity of Trump administration's statement was surprisingly and unusually short and general, only about 100 words. When the White House was asked about these glaring omissions, multiple officials in the new administration at the White House merely confirmed, quote, the statement was no mistake. The Trump White House statement chose not to explicitly acknowledge the deaths of 6 million Jews during the Holocaust. This is atypical of any former president of our country. Moreover, the Trump statement implies that the recognition of the death of Jews during the Holocaust would come at the exclusion of other groups. The tone of those remarks take the reader in the direction of denying the suffering of the Jewish people. For the president not to mention Jews is a terrible omen. So let us go through some history. The term Holocaust, arising from World War II, has come to mean annihilation of Jewish persons. From 1933 to 1945, those Jewish souls who perished in Europe totaled at least 6 million human beings. Between 2.7 million and 3 million Jews were murdered in Nazi-run death camps. In the USSR, 1,340,000 Jewish deaths were ordered by Joseph Stalin. At least 1.5 million of the victims forcibly killed by Hitler and Stalin were children. Cumulatively, this carnage represented about 2/3 of the 9 million Jews who had resided in Central Europe. By way of explanation, for the 8 million Christians and others who were also murdered, the term generally used to describe their carnage is martyrdom. As an example, in Poland, 3 million Catholic Christian Poles were martyred by Nazi and Soviet killing machines. The Holocaust also included Stalin's mass executions and forced starvation and relocation of Soviet prisoners of war to fight in horrendous places like the Battle of Monte Cassino after being marched through the Middle East, many of them buried in Tehran. Stalin also perpetrated a massive post-war ethnic and religious cleansing of Jews and non-Jews. As Hitler and Stalin fought for control of the European continent, over 14 million innocent people. These aren't soldiers I'm talking about. That was in addition to the 14 million. But women, children, men who were civilians died in their vastly evil plunder. Millions of Eastern Europeans were trapped between the two most murderous regimes in not only European history, but human history, Nazi Germany and Communist Soviet Union. As an aside, I found it chilling that President Trump's top advisor, Steve Bannon, in an address to the Vatican in 2014, referenced in a most troubling line of thought the name of Julius Evola and his murderous movement. Julius Evola has been described as one of the most influential fascist racists in Italian history, admired by the Nazi SS, its commander Heinrich Himmler, and Benito Mussolini. Nazi SS Reichsfuhrer Heinrich Himmler was most certainly responsible for the Holocaust. Hitler's madness obsessed over creating an Aryan nation. Joseph Stalin's depraved dream of conquest knew no bounds. Stalin even conscripted Jews to lead hunts to exterminate other ethnic groups and then killed the Jews when the mission was completed. The level of Stalin's depravity is difficult for sane people to understand. Violent anti-Semitism and hatred did not end with the defeat of Nazi Germany and the ultimate collapse of the Communist Soviet Union. We can observe a resurgence in certain places in Europe and, sadly, even in isolated incidents here in the United States. History tells us that the rising anti-Semitic violence is not just a threat to civil society today, but the future of free people everywhere. The recent anti-Semitic terrorist incidents in Paris, at the Bataclan, and Jewish-owned enterprises, or Nazi symbols appearing in hateful situations here in our own beloved country, demand that decent people find peaceful means to stare down hate. Timothy Snyder's masterful book, Bloodlands, documents the 6 million souls of the Holocaust and 8 million souls of martyrdom and murder. The Nazis established killing centers for efficient mass execution, and these killing centers, also referred to as extermination camps or death camps, were almost exclusively death factories. German Schutzstaffel and police murdered nearly 2.7 million Jews in these killing centers, either by asphyxiation with poison gas or by shooting. For the non-Jewish populations of Europe, the 8 million non-Jewish victims of Nazi and communist campaigns of mass murder, these included Romas, Soviet prisoners of war, Actian T4 patients, Ukrainian Holodomor famine victims, Serbs, the disabled, the LGBTQ communities, and others known only to God. There were also unfathomable crimes against entire nations, as Poland and Belarus both slated for complete extinction. Poland lost an astounding 20% of its entire population, with 6 million killed in the war, and Belarus, though smaller in population, lost 25% of its population. In Poland, leaders were annihilated. Many members of the Catholic clergy were either threatened with deportation, kept in custody, or sent to camps. The Catholic Church was particularly suppressed, where nearly a fifth of all priests, over 3,000, were killed between 1939 and 1945, most in concentration camps. From 1932 to 1933, Joseph Stalin's forced famine engulfed much of present-day Ukraine and its surrounding eastern flank. And the heaviest losses were in Ukraine, which is struggling for its freedom today, which had been the most productive agricultural area of the Soviet Union. Stalin was determined to crush all evidence of Ukrainian pride, and as with Poland's leadership, the famine was accompanied by a devastating purge of all of Ukraine's intelligentsia. Millions of peasants were condemned to death by starvation. Troops and secret police units waged a merciless war against peasants who refused to give up their grain. Any man, woman, or child caught taking even a handful of grain from a collective farm could be, and often were, executed or deported to work camps. Stalin's system of internal passports and brutal secret police forced collectivization of the land to communist-run production. And after a long search through history and record-keeping, I can personally give testimony and even learn that the Catholic Church located in today's Ukraine, in which our maternal grandparents were married, held a dark secret. Joseph Stalin's secret police, the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, the NKVD, killed 168 people in its basement as Stalin's Black Raven trucks drove the innocents to their death. Historians continue to seek truth even until today about what happened. Their painstaking research includes information from the Soviet archives. And though some people try to erase history or ignore it, others work diligently to record it and learn from it. I recall how fondly our grandmother spoke of Jewish storekeepers in the region from which she emigrated, welcoming her before and after church on Sunday and telling her to change into her church shoes there before attending Mass and after her 5-mile hike from her village and the 5-mile hike back. And the Jewish storekeeper would always give her a piece of candy. There are other members here tonight that wish to speak, and I'm so grateful for